Okay, so it's lesson 12, part 2. We've got our weather network widget mostly working. We're going to actually use an API that uses JSON now. So what we want to do on our register page is we want to incorporate Google Recaptcha. So I've put the link here on Blackboard. I'm actually going to, thank you, yes. Sorry about that. Thanks, Justin. Okay. Okay, you can see the screen now. Probably can see my Blackboard window. Okay, so the link to Recaptcha is here. So I'm going to copy that link. I'll actually use Chrome because I'm logged into my Google account and I'll need my Google account for this. So let's have a look at Recaptcha and how it works. So Recaptcha's changed over the years. Originally, Recaptcha was developed by some professors at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, and Google bought it years ago. The original intent of Recaptcha, it actually had a dual purpose. So some of you probably remember that we used to get text, sort of hard to read text, and we would have to retype. And when Recaptcha was started, the original point of it was to digitize old text that had been scanned, where the characters often were hard to read. So if many people typed in the same characters for a particular word, that allowed the character recognition to properly know what the text was. And there are millions of hours a day worth of human work done in terms of digitizing old text. And that was also a way to prevent bots from filling out our forms and filling them up with spam. So it had a dual purpose. And of course, like many other interesting things on the internet, Google, one of the big players, came in and bought it. Just like Google bought YouTube, Google bought Recaptcha. And then for quite a while, Recaptcha was mostly being used for Google Street View, right? We'd see pictures of house numbers, pictures of addresses and places, and Google would want users to confirm what they were seeing so that they could more accurately plan out Google Maps. And we still see this where we might be asked to identify bridges or crosswalks, for example. So now there's a few different ways. There's 3 different versions here. So there's Recaptcha 3. We're going to use one of the other versions. So Justin, you had asked about this. So on the Recaptcha page, you will need to sign into your Google account to use this. We can actually see it here. This is kind of like the silent one, but we're going to use one so that a version 2 where we can actually interact with the API. So if you see this admin console button here, if you go into the admin console, and we want to set CAPTCHA up for our music library. So in here, it tells me I have a whole bunch of sites. You probably have nothing here, but there's a create button. So I'm going to click this. I want to create a new site that uses Recaptcha. So I'm going to click on it. And it's going to ask me to give it a name. So if I want to add Recaptcha to different sites, I've got to name them all and set them up separately. So I'll call this Winter 20 Music Library. Okay. And then it asks, which one do we want? So there's different types which we can have a look at. So there's version 3 that kind of does it silently, where the user doesn't do anything. It's just JavaScript. And then version 2, there were the 3 different versions. One for Android, one with the I'm not a robot checkbox, and then there's kind of this invisible one. We're actually going to use this one, this version 2 I'm not a robot. So it will look like this. So I'm going to pick version 2, and I'm going to pick I'm not a robot. And then it wants us to add the domains where this website can run. So I'm going to add 2 domains. My first one is localhost. I'll click the plus button. I'm also going to add computer studies. So we can also run this on AWS. So again, just give your site a name. Pick Recaptcha version 2, I'm not a robot. And the domains are localhost and computer studies. I'm going to accept the terms of service. And I'm going to uncheck this box that says send alerts to owners. I don't need alerts for this. Justin, what do you mean? Do you need to add all this? I'm not sure what you mean. You can turn your mic on and explain maybe. Okay, well, you should be adding, yes, everything. Yes, you need to set in order to set the Recaptcha up, you need to be picking the same options that I am doing in order for it to work. So you're going to create a new site and give it a name. You're going to pick Recaptcha version 2. I'm not a robot checkbox, and you need to add the domains localhost and computer studies.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Or I thought I had it turned off. No, do I need the whole thing or just the part before the first slash? Like the first 2 words right before the .com. Do I need that or do I need the full link?
You just need the base domain name, just exactly how I have them.
Okay.
Because when I mouse over it, it says subdomains are included. So if you've registered example.com, and then you also want to use Recaptcha on subdomain.example.com, it will still work. And it says do not include any path, port, query, or fragment. So it just wants the root domain only. So add both of those. And then it should work both locally and on AWS. And then I'll click submit. So then it gives us 2 API keys. There's a site key. So this is going to go in our HTML. So users will actually be able to see this key if they view the source of the page. And then there's a link here to how to integrate on the client side. And then we've got a secret key, and we're going to use this in our PHP code to make sure that the CAPTCHA code is valid before we let a user register. So we've got these 2 links here, and I'm going to open this one that says see client-side integration. This is going to give us some code we can copy and paste into the register form. So it explains, this is the API documentation, and most APIs will come with documentation that explain, if we want to use the API, how do we use it? And if we're going to build our own APIs, we have to create documentation for other developers. So we want to automatically render the widget. So we're going to need basically 2 things from here, from this section. We need this script tag. So this is going to link to the Recaptcha API JavaScript. So I'm going to copy, I don't need all the HTML because this is creating a whole page. So I'm going to put this in the register page. We don't need it on every page, but in my register.php, I'm going to put it down here before our footer. We may have to move it. This is our Google Recaptcha generator script. And then I want the Recaptcha to appear before our button. So in between our confirm password and our register button. So that would be here. I want it to show up. So I'm going to go back to the docs, and it's got a div tag here, and this will use the API JavaScript and generate a reCAPTCHA code. And notice also it says your site key. So we're going to need the site key in there. So we're going to do 2 copies and paste. I'm going to grab this div and copy it. And I'm going to paste it into my register form right here. So it's a class of gRecaptcha, so Google will style it. And then I need to replace the site key value with the key that Google generated for us. So go back. And I'm going to click on this copy site key button here. So this copies this value to the clipboard. And I'm going to paste it in and replace the words your _site _key. So this is a public value. Users will be able to see this if they view the source of the page. So let's look at what this generates. So if I refresh my register page, I now get my reCAPTCHA. Whoops, I left out an exclamation mark here in my comment. So that should be a comment, so it turns gray. I'll go over these steps again. So now I have my reCAPTCHA. Now it's not actually doing anything. I can still fill out my form. Doesn't matter if I fill it out or not. Actually, let me fill it out. We're not actually doing any checking yet. Okay, you got an invalid domain. Just a minute, Walt. So even if I don't check the button and I click register, it still lets me sign up. So we've only done half the job. If you're getting invalid domain, then the issue is here. So go back to your settings. And you've got to make sure in your domain you have localhost here. If I take that out, I will get the invalid domain for site key. So I'm going to take it out and you'll see what we get. So if localhost is not authorized to use this API, okay, you know what? I think there's just a time lag. I don't know why it worked for me so quickly. I did see this when I was playing around with it. Sometimes it just takes a bit of time. So let me go back and add localhost. I'm actually surprised it worked so quickly for me. Okay, we'll look at, I'm going to continue on. You can follow along with the code on our save register page. It may just take a little while before the domain is validated for you. So it's showing up here. So now on our save page, if we go back to the documentation, there's now information about verifying the user's response. So when our form is posted, it's now going to include a field called gRecaptcha response. So that's a hidden field that the Google API generates. So here's our site key that's visible. So we're going to make a post request to the Google API. We're not actually going to take the user. I'm not sure, Hung. I don't see in the settings where it allows us to change the timeout. It's a good question, but I don't see that we have access to that. So we're going to make an API request to this URL. We don't take the user there. We just make a post, a hidden post, and we send it a JSON object. And this is what we send. We have to send the site key. So this is our private or our secret key. And then we have to send the user response. So that's going to come from this Recaptcha response. That'll store what the user did. Did they check the box that says I'm not a robot? And the API will send us back a JSON response that will look like this. It's got a success value of true or false. It's got a challenge timestamp. It's got a host. And if the reCAPTCHA fails, it'll return an error. So we then need to parse this JSON and decide if the CAPTCHA was valid or invalid. And here are some of the error codes it might give us. So on our save page, we're going to need to make a hidden HTTP post request to this API, send in our site key, send in the user response, and then see what we get back. So I'm going to open up Save Registration. And then after my password check, we'll add our Recaptcha Verification. So first, I'm going to copy and paste my secret key value from the Google console. So in my settings, if I go back to my keys, I can copy the secret key. And I'll paste that in. Other variable I want to set is the user response. And this is going to come from the field that Google generates called Recaptcha response. This is kind of a hidden field we don't see. Google generates and submits this along with our form using JavaScript. And we're going to use CURL library in PHP to set up a post request to the Google Verify API. So using our key and the user's response, we're going to create a JSON object and send that information off to Google, see what we get back. So I'll maybe call this, create a variable called API request. We're going to use the CURL library. That allows us to call another URL. We're going to set up some options. We've got this built-in method for creating options with our curl request. We're going to set up 3 options. Actually, 3 options here and 1 down below. The first option we're going to set up, what is the URL we want to call? And that URL is going to come from the Google panel. So it tells me right here, here's the URL. It's google.com/recaptcha/API/site verify. And our method is going to be post. So I'm going to copy that URL. Again, that's under the documentation, verifying the user's response. So I'm going to paste that URL in here. Oops, I didn't actually click copy. Try that again. So this is the URL we're going to send our request to. Second option we're going to set is called return transfer. So we are expecting data to come back and we want the user to stay on our site. We're not taking them in the browser to this URL. We're just sending data to that URL. The last thing we need to set is the method. So we're going to set the post option to true. How do we know we're doing a post? Well, the Google APIs say you can't send a GET request here. You have to send a POST request. And in the POST request, we need the 2 required fields are the secret and the response. Optionally, we can include the user's IP. We don't really care about that. So we're going to need to send in the secret and the user response. So now we need to create an array. Hold the values we need to send to Google. So I'll call my array maybe API post data. And then I'm going to put in the secret and the user response. I wish we could do this code kind of in chunks, but really we have to write all the code. It's not going to work if we only do part of it. We sort of need to do all of it at once. And we also want to put these words, secret and response, these are defined here in the API. So the 2 parameters of the post are called secret and response, all in lowercase. So we have to match these exactly. So when we're sending data to an API, we have to follow the specification. What's the URL? What's the method? And what parameters do we have to send? We'll look at what happens if we don't follow these things. So our response is going to be our user response variable. Up here. And then we're going to set one more curl option by passing this array. So to our API request, we're going to set the post fields. To our array, which has 2 elements. So this is going to pass this array that has our secret and our response. Now we want to execute the API request. So I'll create a variable called API result, and we will call curl exec. This will actually run the command that we've set up. So we're using the CURL, the curl library, to call the URL with a post and send in the data this API wants. And after that, we can call curl closed. So that should end our request. And then we're going to have this JSON object that comes back from Google. It will look something like this. So we need to convert that from JSON to an array, and then we can see what we get. We want to convert the JSON response from Google to an array so we can read it. So we've got functions in PHP to create JSON objects from arrays, as well as to convert JSON into a string array. So we want to use JSON decode. And now we can check if the CAPTCHA successful or not. So we're going to check the success property. If this is false, then the reCAPTCHA failed. So we'll echo a message and we'll say OK is false. So if the user fails the reCAPTCHA, you're not going to let them register. I will put all this code up on GitHub. I want to try it out and also move it around a little, try a few different things just so we can understand a little better how it works. I'll give this a try. You guys can also let me know if and when your invalid domain errors go away. So I'm going to try. I won't fill out the CAPTCHA. And now I get this, right? Success was equal to false. So it doesn't let me sign up. If I complete it successfully, now it lets me sign up and I can log in. Still not working. Okay, thanks for the update. Well, now I'm going to make a few changes just so I know that's a fair bit of code. So what happens, for example, if my site key is wrong? Let's say I mess up the site key value. Now when I go to load my form, I get invalid site key. So it knows, it's checking that the key matches what I have here in the Google console. That's number one. What about if I don't use these exact words, the secret or the response? Let's say, I put those in as capital S. What's going to happen? So I fix my site key. But I'm not a robot. So even though I answered it properly, because my request that I'm making to Google isn't right, it's looking for a lowercase secret value and a lowercase response value. According to the specifications, it needs secret and response, both in lowercase. Yep. So I'm going to undo that. Well, did you mean on the register page or on the save page? You can always turn on your mic if it's faster. Okay. So the code ends here. Now I also want to upload this to AWS. It seems to be working for me on my local machine, but I need to make sure it's also going to work on the live server. Okay. Always, everything we do, we have to make sure that it works live. It's not enough to be able to say to our boss or our client, hey, well, it works on my own computer, because ultimately the applications we're building, they're always going to have to go on web servers, and they're going to have to run live on the internet. So I'm going to upload my register and save registration to AWS, and we'll see if those are going to work for me. So I'm going to give those a try. Now, also to use this, one other thing I will my other site. Oh, that's interesting. It broke my location again. Won't worry about that for now. And I'm in Chrome. So now so it recognizes the domain. It's not giving me that red invalid domain error. If I leave the reCAPTCHA unchecked, I get this message. If I go back and check it, I think I need to refresh. That's why. The secret key, just a minute, is in the Google console. Let me make sure I've saved this properly. So to find your key in the Google console, you just expand this Recaptcha keys section. And it's here. I'll try again. So I have my domain. Okay, changes may take up to 30 minutes to take effect. I assume you guys are still getting the invalid domain. Yes, okay. So I think it's just going to take some time. Let's see what it tells us here about the domain validation. So it's saying Recaptcha will work on all these. If you want to use localhost, we have to add it. Okay, so it says recommends we leave that on. So I think I'll just have to wait for it to work on AWS. Just check my keys that they look right. So starting with a 6 and ending with an X is my site key. Looks right. And my secret key starts with a 6 and ends with an R. Which also looks right. My URL looks correct. Just make sure, again, things work locally. Okay, so it looks like it works locally. I'll try it on AWS one more time. If it doesn't work, I'll just have to wait, I think, for them to verify the domain. Yeah, so if you're getting that and it's not working for me on AWS, I think it's just time. It's just time. I see that Walt and Rebecca, you're still getting error for site owner, and you do have localhost in the list of domains, correct? Okay, yeah, I assumed so. So I think it's just time on Google's end. So we'll just have to wait and see. We can maybe we're going to do one more thing today, and maybe we'll check it again before the end of class. I'm also curious because it seems to run fine for me locally. And I'm not getting an invalid domain here, which tells me the domain is recognized. Well, let's see what's, maybe I'll check here. If I don't get false, I can always look in the error and see what I'm getting. So we get error codes. I may be able to see what that is. Actually, I guess this would go in here because it is returning false. I'm going to have to see why this is happening on AWS. Okay, well, I can't really address that right now, but we did do that, so you may want to have another look at last week's lesson. It's probably a permissions issue that you need to enable the right permissions on the folder you're trying to upload to. So I'm going to go back and try one more time. See if I get an error code. So it's not actually. We'll just try and print the whole thing. Interesting. So I'm not actually getting anything back from AWS, but I do locally. Yet this returns false. We'll do one more attempt here. Maybe there's something else I need to do that I'm not thinking of. I'll take a pause in a minute. Whoops, I don't want to check that box. So we're actually not getting anything back from Google. So it's not sending me an error. It's sending not actually sending anything back at all. Okay, I'm gonna just wait it out. We'll see if your guys validate domains validate. And I'm curious to see if I give this a bit more time if this works on AWS. There may be something else I need to do with it. Deployed this to AWS before with no problem, but we will see. So I'm going to take maybe if you have any questions, and then I'm going to take a quick break, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes. What I want to do is actually build our own API with our music library, and we can look at how that works. That shouldn't take us too long. And then I will give you your lab. Any questions before we take a pause? Yeah, Hung. The lab won't be due until next Wednesday. Sorry, no, the lab is due Friday, but it's really quick. It should take 10 minutes. And it's mostly copy and paste. It's about as difficult as the Weather Network API was. So Friday afternoon. I would, yes. And assignment 2 part 3, which is due next Wednesday. And next week, instead of class, next week's class is a lab, and it's designed as a practice. Yes, Walt, I know that. There's no other way to do this with really less code than what we added. So I will push to GitHub now. This code is obviously going to have my keys. So if you want to run it, you'd probably want it to put in your own API keys. Yes, I will be going over the exam next week. Okay, so the code's been uploaded. I will stop the stream and add it to the playlist, and I'll be back at 1:15.